Welcome to The Debate. Imagine someone destroying your sanity, not with shouting or fists, but with a heavy sigh, a downcast look, and a whisper of, I guess I'm just not important.
Wow. Yeah, it is, it's incredibly chilling.
Right. We are stepping into the hidden, highly destructive world of covert narcissism today. As a behavioral profiler, I look at the mechanics of human behavior. And, well, what I see in the covert narcissist is a chilling investigation into predatory manipulation.
And from my perspective in the clinical space, working with the actual survivors of this abuse, it's a very dark dynamic, one that leaves completely invisible scars.
Exactly. I mean, we all know the grandiose narcissist, right? The loud, boastful center of attention.
The one who demands the spotlight.
Right, exactly. But the covert narcissist hides in plain sight. They use a mask of extreme vulnerability to achieve the exact same dominance. So to me, covert narcissism is a calculated predatory power grab that weaponizes false humility to, well, extract validation and enslave empathetic people.
I hear that. But the focus shouldn't just be on the perpetrator's pursuit of power. The true devastation of covert narcissism, really, lies in how it systematically dismantles the victim's reality.
It is an invisible emotional abuse using soft gaslighting and trauma bonding to basically force the victim into a state of permanent psychological exhaustion until they literally do not know who they are anymore.
Well, when I profile this behavior, I just don't see the fragility that society assumes is there. People look at a quiet, brooding, self-deprecating partner or boss and think, oh, they just need love. Right. They think they just need support.
Exactly. But no. I see a predator in a very, very effective disguise. I mean, Alfred Adler, one of the pioneers of psychotherapy, noted that if you look closely at an inferiority complex, you will almost always find a superiority complex hidden underneath.
Oh, absolutely. The grandiosity is completely still there.
It is. The covert narcissist operates exactly on this dynamic. They use self-deprecation not because they have low self-esteem, but because it is an incredibly effective tool for behavioral control. Look at Charles Dickens' character Uriah Heep, which the source material uses to perfectly illustrate this archetype. Heep constantly talked about how humble he was.
Yes, always bowing and scraping.
Right, always bowing. But that performative lowliness was a calculated strategy. Why do it? Well, because when you present yourself as pathetic, you completely disarm the threat detection systems of the people around you.
You fly right under the radar.
Exactly. You extract sensitive information, you gain their trust, and eventually, you usurp control of their lives. When someone constantly puts themselves down to force you to drop everything and build them up, that's not depression. That's weaponized guilt.
Yeah. I mean, I hear your focus on the calculation, the idea of the predator in disguise. But as a therapist, I am looking at the absolute wreckage left behind.
Sure.
And the intent of the predator is almost secondary when you look at the psychological trap laid for the victim. In cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about confirmation bias, right?
Right. The tendency for the brain to only notice information that confirms what it already believes.
Exactly. But covert narcissists use what is essentially an inverted confirmation bias.
Interesting. How so?
Well, mechanically, they present themselves as so exceptionally sensitive, so deeply wounded by the world, that they successfully install a core belief in the victim's mind.
And that belief is what? That they need saving?
Exactly. The belief is, this person is fragile, I must protect them, and this is exactly what trips victims up. Once that belief is hardwired into the victim's brain, they become completely blind to the abuse.
Because they're constantly making excuses for them.
Yes. They start filtering out the manipulation because their brain is constantly interpreting the narcissist's punitive behaviors as, like, manifestations of suffering. If the narcissist is cruel, the victim thinks, oh, they are just lashing out because they are in pain.
Right.
The danger isn't just that the narcissist wants power. It's that they create an environment where the victim volunteers to walk on eggshells for decades. They are willingly sacrificing their own sanity to manage someone else's emotional regulation, all because their empathy has been hijacked.
Okay.
I see why you emphasize the victim's hijacked empathy, but I'd argue that caregiving isn't just an unfortunate psychological side effect. It is actively, mathematically exploited.
Exploited, sure, but
Wait, let me bring in Friedrich Nietzsche here. His concept of slave morality is incredibly relevant to how this trap is set. Nietzsche described how the weak, lacking the physical power or courage to dominate others directly, instead invent a morality that elevates their weakness to a virtue.
I see where you're going with this.
Right? They rebrand their cowardice as patience. They rebrand their impotence as meekness. And the covert narcissist is the modern, interpersonal embodiment of this. They use pity to emasculate the strong.
But look at how they use pity, though.
Well, they fish for compliments through self-deprecation. They create a dynamic where your strength, your empathy, your capability becomes the very chain they use to enslave you. It is a brilliant, malevolent strategy. They aren't just getting you to walk on eggshells. They are getting you to build the cage yourself.
Okay, yes, but wait, look at how they use pity in the day-to-day. It's not just a strategic power grab to lock you in a cage. It creates a profound emotional starvation for the partner.
Starvation?
Yes, the false humility you're talking about creates a completely one-way street of emotional unavailability. When the covert narcissist plays the victim, they demand constant, bottomless validation.
Right. You have to pour all your energy into soothing them.
Exactly. But because they fundamentally lack empathy, they cannot return that support. If the victim has a bad day, gets sick, or achieves something wonderful, the covert narcissist subtly changes the subject back to their own suffering.
Or they minimize it completely.
Yes, they minimize the victim's success with envy disguised as indifference. They might say, "Oh, it must be nice to get a promotion. I had to turn one down years ago because I was too ethical to play office politics."
Oh, wow. That is brutal.
Do you see how insidious that is? The victim is left emotionally starved, pouring endless energy into a black hole of need. The real danger is the resulting isolation and emotional death of the partner.
I mean, you describe this as emotional starvation, but I'd argue that starvation isn't an accident. It's the prerequisite for how they manage the physical reality of the relationship.
How so?
Because, well, once you're emotionally depleted, you don't have the energy to fight back when they start weaponizing daily responsibilities. Let's look at the behavioral tactic of weaponized incompetence.
Oh yeah, that is a classic.
The source material points to a highly relatable example: loading the dishwasher. The covert narcissist doesn't just refuse to do the chore. That would be too overt.
Right, that would break the mask of the good guy.
Exactly. Instead, they deliberately do it so poorly, putting bowls over cups, leaving food on the plates, that the partner just gives up and does it themselves. The genius of doing the dishes badly isn't that they get out of a 10-minute chore. It's that they train you.
Yes, they train you like a lab rat to stop asking them for help entirely. They are buying a lifetime of immunity from responsibility for the cost of breaking a few plates.
It's so frustrating to even talk about.
Right, it's a calculated transfer of burden. And when they do decide to be helpful, they use calculated altruism. Their generosity is never free. It is an investment designed to manufacture an emotional debt.
So they can hold it over you later.
Exactly. The moment you try to set a boundary, they recall the debt. After everything I've done for you. They are actively manipulating the behavioral economics of the relationship. I hear that, but I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the primary damage comes from the active sabotage of chores or the calculation of favors.
Really? You don't think that breaks people down over time?
The more insidious damage, the damage that takes years to unspool in therapy, comes from what the victim cannot see. It's the passive-aggressive martyrdom. It's not the poorly loaded dishwasher that breaks a person. It's the heavy sigh from the other room that accompanies it. It's the prolonged, wounded silences.
The silent treatment.
Yes, the silent treatment is devastating because the victim is being punished but hasn't been told what the crime is. Your brain goes into overdrive trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution.
Well, that's true. It's incredibly disorienting.
And then there are the micro-insults perfectly disguised as concern. When a covert narcissist says, "You look great today," much better than usual. Right, the victim feels the sting. But if they react, they look crazy, because on paper, it was a compliment. This indirect communication forces the victim into a permanent guessing game.
They're always hypervigilant.
Exactly. They are constantly trying to decode the narcissist's mood, and they are always wrong. That passive aggression is what shatters the victim's nervous system. And if you're listening to this and thinking, wait, my partner sighs heavily when I ask them to take out the trash, are they a covert narcissist? Let's be clear.
Right, we all have bad days.
Exactly. The defining factor here isn't a bad mood. It's the systematic, long-term erasure of your reality, where you are always the villain.
I hear you on the physical toll, the sheer exhaustion of it. We have to ask why that guessing game is so effective in the first place.
Okay, why?
It works because the narcissist is using a highly calibrated shield, their hypersensitivity to criticism. As a profiler, I look at how suspects react to confrontation.
And they deflect.
Massively. With a covert narcissist, any gentle feedback, even a completely neutral request like, could you please text me if you're going to be late, is met with a massive defensive shift. They immediately transform into the ultimate victim.
They turn it around on you completely.
Right. They use plausible deniability to evade accountability. When they deploy a phrase like, I'm sorry you feel that way, it's a verbal sleight of hand.
Oh, I absolutely hate that phrase.
It's totally toxic. They are taking the spotlight off their abusive action and shining it directly onto your emotional reaction. Suddenly, the argument isn't about what they did, it's about whether your feelings are valid. It exhausts the victim's cognitive load until they just drop the argument entirely. They are actively distorting the narrative to ensure they never have to take responsibility.
But look at what that shield does to the other person. What you're describing mechanically is soft gaslighting.
Soft gaslighting.
Yes, and it leads to the total erosion of the victim's sanity. The grandiose narcissist might scream, "You're crazy," which is terrifying but easy to identify.
Sure, it's very overt.
But the covert narcissist does it in small, daily, homeopathic doses. They say, "I don't know why you're reacting like this," or "I never said that. Your memory's been so bad lately."
Right.
Over months and years, this soft invalidation makes the victim stop trusting their own brain. They literally lose their grip on reality. And when you combine this with the intermittent cycle of the relationship, where the narcissist alternates between punitive withdrawal and sudden, vulnerable connection, you get a trauma bond.
So you call it a trauma bond, which sounds highly clinical.
It is a clinical term, yes.
But as a profiler, when I look at the intermittent withdrawal and sudden connection, I don't see a bond at all. I see an addiction protocol.
An addiction protocol?
Yes. They are hijacking the victim's dopamine exactly the way a slot machine does in a casino. They pull away, starve you of affection, and just when you're about to walk away, they hit you with a jackpot of vulnerability and warmth. How is that a bond and not just classical conditioning used to subjugate an opponent?
Well, it's both. And that's exactly why it is so terrifying. A trauma bond is a traumatic attachment created by those cycles of reward and punishment. It activates the exact same neural circuits as substance dependency.
Right, so it is an addiction.
Yes, but it's experienced as love. The covert narcissist withdraws, punishing the victim with silence, creating massive anxiety and a spike in cortisol. The victim feels like they are dying emotionally.
And then comes the reward.
Exactly. Suddenly, the narcissist offers a crumb of affection or a moment of vulnerability. The victim's brain floods with dopamine and relief, and they begin to associate that relief with love. They confuse the cessation of pain with genuine connection.
Wow.
It becomes neurologically and psychologically agonizing for the victim to leave. They aren't staying because they are weak or because they've been outsmarted in some power game. They are staying because their neurochemistry has been hijacked by this intermittent reinforcement.
That's why I argue the ultimate danger is the systematic dismantling of the victim's psychological architecture.
You know, we are converging on a very dark truth here. To survive a covert narcissist, you have to be able to see through the disguise. You have to recognize that the shy, introverted, or depressed persona is actually a predator's camouflage.
They are hiding their grandiosity in plain sight.
Exactly. Protecting yourself means looking at the behavioral reality, not the pitiable narrative they are spinning. You have to refuse to accept the emotional debts they manufacture and, well, refuse to play the game of false humility.
You have to step off the eggshells. Right. When they present the heavy sigh and the victim routine, you have to recognize the hook and refuse to bite.
And recovering from that dynamic demands something incredibly difficult: validating your own perceptions without needing their agreement.
Because they will never agree.
Never. Healing requires breaking that trauma bond and setting concrete, unmovable boundaries. We teach survivors to use the gray rock method, basically becoming as emotionally uninteresting and unresponsive as a literal gray rock.
So no emotional fuel.
Exactly. When the covert narcissist sighs heavily or drops a micro-insult, you give a flat, neutral response. You stop providing the emotional fuel they are trying to extract. You have to rebuild your external support network to remind you of what reality actually looks like, outside of their distorted funhouse mirror.
It is a chilling reality that the very traits we associate with harmlessness, shyness, sensitivity, a quiet demeanor, can be the exact mechanisms of such profound control. The disguise is what makes it so incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. I mean, human psychology is infinitely complex, and it requires us to look beyond the surface. If you find yourself constantly exhausted, constantly doubting your own memory, or sacrificing your own sanity just to manage someone else's fragile ego, well, it might be time to take a hard look at the dynamic you're in.
There is so much more to uncover in the clinical and behavioral research about personality disorders and how they shape our closest relationships. Until then, remember that the most dangerous psychological traps rarely announce themselves with a shout. Sometimes the destruction of your reality begins with nothing more than a heavy sigh, a downcast look, and a whisper of, "I guess I'm just not important."